What would you do if the man who promised you forever tried to erase you instead? Camilla Washington was once the queen of her world, self-made, brilliant, unstoppable. Until she married a billionaire who didn't want a partner, he wanted a prisoner. And when she found the strength to leave, he pushed her down a marble staircase. Everyone thought she'd never walk again. What they didn't know was that she was playing dead for the smartest, coldest revenge this courtroom has ever seen. From where are you watching this video? Tell us in the comments. And stay locked in, because this ending changes everything. From the outside, it looked like the perfect beginning. Camilla Washington had just closed on her third commercial renovation contract in under 6 months. She was 34, self-made, and featured on the cover of Modern Spaces for her signature aesthetic, warm luxury with roots. Every inch of her portfolio whispered elegance, but it was the soul in her work that made her unforgettable. She didn't just design spaces. She resurrected them. She was the kind of black woman who made everyone in the room straighten up, not because she demanded it, but because her presence made you respect the grind. So when she met Richard Blackstone at a charity art gala, her, in a minimalist black jumpsuit with gold accents, him, every inch of him polished, towering, and billionaire branded, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like alignment. They moved fast. Not in lust, but in this surreal cadence of two accomplished people who found, in each other, a mirrored ambition. Richard knew all the right things to say, that her work inspired him, that she was unlike anyone he'd ever met. He didn't talk down to her. He uplifted her, or so it seemed. Within 3 months, he bought the rights to a dilapidated mansion in Sag Harbor and told her, "Make it your canvas." Camilla called it love. Her best friend called it too good to be true. At first, she brushed off the doubts. Who wouldn't be swept up? Private dinners on rooftops in Venice. Personalized gifts that weren't flashy, but thoughtful. The way he looked at her in a crowded room, like nothing else mattered. But the cracks came quietly. Insidious. He began suggesting changes. Little ones. Don't you think that client takes too much of your time? Why don't we hire someone to manage your calendar so we can spend more time together? It sounded sweet. Even protective. Until one day she looked up and realized her design firm had taken a back seat. The calls stopped coming. The clients moved on. And the woman who once ran every inch of her life now had to check in before booking a flight. He called it partnership. She was beginning to call it something else. Camilla's independence didn't die in a single blow. It eroded, piece by piece, soft as sand slipping beneath her feet. She laughed less. Her world became smaller. His circle replaced hers. Fundraisers, gallery openings, country clubs where she was always introduced as Richard's wife before her name was mentioned, if at all. The day she found out her personal savings account had been merged into a joint portfolio. Without her knowledge, she sat in their kitchen for an hour, staring at a glass of untouched wine. It was her name on the account. Her years of hustling. Her sacrifice. And now, it was a line item in someone else's empire. But it wasn't until his mother's charity brunch, when a woman in pearls clutched her arm and said with a bright smile, "You're quite the accessory, dear." I do love Richard's taste in decor, that Camilla truly felt it. She had become a guest in her own life. And deep inside her chest, something ancient stirred. Not anger. Not even betrayal. But warning. The kind that came with your grandmother's voice in your ear, whispering, "This ain't love, baby. This is erasure." The fall hadn't happened yet, but it was coming. And when it did, it would not be quiet. Camilla didn't leave, not yet. That's what confused people the most. Those who'd seen her at her peak, commanding architects and contractors with the confidence of a woman who had nothing to prove. They couldn't understand why she stayed in a house where the doors closed tighter every day. But that's the thing about control. It doesn't arrive as a monster. It arrives as a whisper. And Camilla was listening. After the charity brunch, things got colder. Richard began cutting her off mid-sentence during conversations. He'd humiliate her in front of guests by correcting her opinions. If she questioned it later, he'd say, "It's just a joke, baby. You're being sensitive again." She wasn't. And she knew it. He was no longer hiding it. The mask was slipping, and with every crack, Camilla started seeing the truth behind the polish. His charm was strategic. His generosity? Transactional. Everything had terms, including her love. At first, she cried in private. The old Camilla, the girl raised by her aunties who taught her how to spot a lie wearing a silk tie, she felt ashamed. How could she have missed it? But shame is a distraction. And Camila, once she dried her tears, remembered exactly who she was. So she stopped reacting. When Richard told her she was lucky to be with him, she smiled. When his sister called her ambitious in a cute way, she nodded politely. When he started managing her schedule, her emails, her finances, she said nothing. She was not agreeing. She was collecting. Because somewhere in the quiet of her unraveling, Camila made a choice, not to escape, not to scream, but to observe. She wanted to understand the full scope of the man she'd married before she made her move. And that meant watching him unguarded. So she shrunk her presence in the home. Became the perfect trophy wife. Always agreeable. Always present. Always underestimated. That's when he got sloppy. Richard started coming home late. Started taking work calls with the door open. And then one day, Camila noticed his assistant Patricia's name flashing repeatedly on his private phone. Not the work one. The second one. The one he never let her touch. Still, she didn't react. She packed his favorite lunch one day and showed up at his office unannounced. It was supposed to be a surprise. And it was, just not the kind she had planned. There they were, Patricia on his lap, laughing like the villain in a low-budget movie. When Camila opened the door, neither of them flinched. Richard didn't stammer. He didn't even stand. He just looked at her like she was the one intruding. Don't show up without calling, he snapped, like she was an employee who had crossed a boundary. Patricia didn't even bother covering up. She just smirked. That kind of smugness only exists when someone knows they are protected. That night, Camila didn't cry. She set the table for two, made dinner, poured wine, and waited. When Richard walked in, he was smug, as if daring her to react. Instead, she handed him a plate and asked how his day was. That's when he grew suspicious. She wasn't supposed to take betrayal quietly. She was supposed to scream, throw something, give him ammunition to call her unstable. But Camila just smiled. Because inside her chest, something was shifting. Not breaking, solidifying. The assistant wasn't the issue. The lie wasn't new. What was new was her clarity. He'd taken her name, her independence, her safety. But now, she was about to take something far more dangerous in return. His illusion of control. And the moment he laid hands on her, the moment he dared to push her near that staircase, that would be the beginning of his end. The night of the gala, Camila's world shimmered like crystal, on the outside. Guests arrived in chauffeured town cars, dripping in couture, their laughter echoing through the marble halls of the Blackstone estate. Camila had planned every inch of the evening. From the harpist tucked under the staircase to the curated scent that drifted through the air like expensive secrecy, it was perfect. And that was intentional. Perfection was her camouflage. Richard, on the other hand, was in his element, backslapping with CEOs, whispering promises to senators, taking credit for a night he didn't lift a finger to plan. Camila stood beside him, poised, radiant, a vision of grace. But inside, she was calculating. She hadn't come to impress anyone. She'd come to see if he'd slip. And he did. Near the end of the evening, just as the champagne was starting to dull people's filters, Camila overheard Patricia's voice in the hallway. Laughter laced with cruelty. She was bragging about their little getaway to Italy, mocking Camila's accent, her family, her roots. She tries so hard to belong. It's pathetic, Patricia sneered. But he'll be done with her soon. She's a placeholder. Camila didn't flinch. She'd already heard worse. What pierced her wasn't the insult. It was the fact that Richard hadn't denied it. He was laughing right along with her. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the music softened, Camila found him alone in his study. Her voice was calm, controlled. You made a mistake inviting me into your world, she said. I won't stay in it quietly anymore. Richard stood slowly. The mask was gone now. I told you what would happen if you threatened me, he said, stepping closer. You don't get to leave. Not on your terms. He grabbed her wrist, not hard at first. But when she tried to pull away, his grip tightened. You want a divorce, he hissed. You'll leave with nothing. That's if I let you leave at all. Then he dragged her toward the grand staircase. The party was still humming downstairs. No one noticed. At the top, with the ballroom below lit like a scene from a dream, Richard leaned in close. You think you can embarrass me? Take half of what I built, he whispered, venomous. You were never one of us. You were never supposed to last this long. Then he shoved her.
It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate.
Camilla's body crashed down the marble steps like shattered glass, bones slamming against stone, pain splintering through every limb. But in those endless seconds of tumbling, as her world spun and cracked, one thought rose above the rest.
You just made the most expensive mistake of your life.
When the paramedics arrived, Camilla's eyes fluttered open.
She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She made a decision.
When the doctors asked if she could feel her legs, she answered in a flat voice.
No.
And just like that, the real performance began.
Not one of fear, but of power.
The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of machines and the whispered footsteps of nurses who pitied her.
Camilla didn't blink. She didn't need pity. She needed time. She had survived the fall, and now, she was about to weaponize it.
Her injuries were real: broken ribs, bruised spine, a skull fracture that left her in excruciating pain.
But not paralyzed.
When the neurologist tapped her knee and asked if she could feel it, she kept her face blank and her eyes empty.
No, she said softly.
Nothing.
It was the lie that would save her life.
Richard arrived that night, crocodile tears ready, one hand on her shoulder, the other already texting someone behind his back. He played the devastated husband so well, even the nurses called him sweet.
Camilla let them.
Because in that hospital bed, wrapped in silence and gauze, she wasn't broken.
She was building. The first person she called wasn't a lawyer. It was the mansion's security company.
She asked one simple question: were the stairwell cameras working that night? The man on the other end hesitated.
Yes. Footage autosaves to the cloud.
Her heart didn't race.
She didn't cry.
She simply said, "Send me everything."
Discreetly.
That footage would become her sword. Next, she reached out to Maria, the housekeeper who had seen more than she'd ever spoken about.
Camilla didn't beg.
She just said, "If it were your daughter, would you stay quiet?"
Maria agreed to talk.
Then came the night nurse, hired by Richard himself to care for Camilla at home. The woman had overheard Richard muttering to Patricia during one of his late-night visits, "It'd be easier if she never walked again. She's a ghost now anyway." Camilla recorded everything, without ever lifting a finger. While she sat motionless in her wheelchair, the world believed she was broken. But behind closed doors, she was conducting the most important project of her life.
She hired private investigators.
They tracked Richard's hidden assets, offshore accounts, money funneled into Patricia's name, hush payments to other women. The team found emails, documents, text threads. Richard was already moving to strip her of every financial right, preparing to commit her to a long-term care facility so he could legally declare her incompetent and seize everything. But Camilla was 10 steps ahead. She quietly retained a legal team, black women attorneys with fire in their eyes and case records that made men like Richard sweat through their custom suits. They began compiling everything: the footage, the voice recordings, the financial records, the testimonies. They built not just a case, but a reckoning. All while Camilla kept up the performance: blank stares, shallow responses, obedient silence.
But in her mind,
she was sharpening every word she would one day speak in court. Richard, emboldened by her perceived helplessness, grew cocky, started telling people she was mentally slipping, that he'd soon be free.
He had no idea the woman he pushed down those stairs wasn't gone. She was right there, watching, recording,
waiting. And the moment the court summoned them for the divorce hearing, Camilla smiled for the first time in months. Because the end of her silence would be the end of his empire. The courthouse buzzed like a hive, reporters outside with microphones, cameramen adjusting lenses, lawyers straightening ties.
Most didn't know the details.
Just the headlines: billionaire's wife paralyzed in tragic fall. Now files for divorce. Inside, Richard sat at the defense table, surrounded by a phalanx of overpriced attorneys. He wore grief like a designer suit, measured, tailored, convincing. He even brought Patricia, seated 2 rows behind him, feigning professionalism. He looked at the empty wheelchair next to Camilla's lawyers and smirked. The judge called the hearing to order.
Then the door opened. Camilla walked in. No limp.
No hesitation.
No fear.
The silence in that courtroom wasn't just quiet, it was seismic. Richard's face drained of color.
Patricia's eyes widened. One of the lawyers dropped a pen.
Camilla didn't speak right away. She took her place on the witness stand, her spine straight, her voice clear. "The man sitting across from me didn't just betray me," she said. He tried to erase me.
Her legal team went to work.
First came the footage, high definition, time-stamped, undeniable.
It showed Richard grabbing her, dragging her, pushing her. The jury didn't blink.
The fall was brutal, deliberate.
No ambiguity. No misunderstanding.
Then came the recordings. Richard's voice, low and cold, telling Patricia he wished Camila would just disappear. That she was dead weight. That he'd handle things his way. The financial forensics followed. Proof of hidden accounts, offshore transfers, corporate embezzlement, even a fraudulent attempt to move Camila's inheritance into a trust under Patricia's control. But it wasn't just data.
It was testimony.
Maria, the housekeeper, recounted the insults and threats Richard thought no one heard. The night nurse detailed how Richard mocked Camila's condition, calling her a useless statue. Former colleagues of Richard's revealed a pattern. He didn't just control women.
He destroyed them if they dared to outgrow him.
And then Camila told her story.
Not with tears. With precision. She spoke of the isolation, the manipulation, the erasure of her autonomy. She explained how pretending to be paralyzed wasn't about revenge, it was about safety. It was the only way to survive long enough to be believed. When he pushed me, she said, her voice steady, he thought I'd never rise again. That's why I had to pretend. Because I knew if I told the truth too soon, he'd find another way to finish the job. The jury wept.
The judge sat still for a long moment after Camila's testimony ended. Then came the verdict. Camila was awarded $847 million in damages, the largest divorce settlement in the state's history. She gained control of their primary home, his vacation properties, his prized art collection, and a majority stake in his pharmaceutical empire.
But money wasn't the true victory.
The next day, criminal charges were filed: attempted murder, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice. The board of directors ousted Richard. Federal agents froze his accounts. Patricia flipped, turned over her phone and emails in exchange for immunity. The media blitz that followed made Richard unrecognizable.
Not a mogul.
A monster. As Camila left the courtroom, press shouting her name, she turned once, looked back at the man who thought he could silence her forever. And with the calm of someone who had already won, she simply said, "You told me I'd leave with nothing. But I left with everything you can't steal. My mind, my power, and my story." She walked out, free. Freedom didn't come in one moment for Camila Washington. It unfolded slowly, like sunlight returning after a long storm. Quiet, deliberate, full of grace. And when it did, it didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like a rebirth. In the months following the trial, Camila stayed out of the spotlight. She turned down interviews, book deals, podcast appearances. She didn't want to become a spectacle or a symbol.
She just wanted to be whole again. But healing, for her, didn't mean hiding.
She transformed the mansion where Richard had once tried to destroy her into something sacred, a sanctuary. The grand staircase, the same cold marble that had once held her broken body, was demolished. In its place, she built a lush indoor memorial garden dedicated to survivors of intimate partner violence. Ivy climbed the walls. Names of women who had survived, and those who hadn't, were etched into stone.
At the center, a single quote:
"Power isn't given. It's reclaimed." Camila didn't just rebuild her interior design business.
She redefined it.
She hired women from shelters and reentry programs, mothers, survivors, overlooked artists. She trained them, mentored them, and paid them more than fair wages. Every project they completed bore a plaque. Designed by the Reclaimed Studio. Founded by Camila Washington. Her past became her power. She launched the Phoenix Fund, a nonprofit that offered legal support, emergency housing, and business grants for women leaving abusive relationships. Not charity. Investment. Camila believed survivors weren't weak. They were untapped forces waiting for someone to believe in them again. As for Richard, he was sentenced to 15 years. No parole. No appeals left. The empire he tried to keep Camila from touching crumbled in his absence. Lawsuits piled up. Investors fled. Patricia disappeared from the public eye. And Richard? He became just another cautionary tale. One more reminder that behind every polished facade can lie rot. Camila didn't watch the downfall with bitterness. She didn't need revenge. She had evolution. The final time she visited the courthouse wasn't for paperwork. It was to deliver a speech during a policy hearing about expanding protection for domestic abuse survivors, particularly Black women, who are so often unheard, unbelieved, and unprotected by the systems meant to serve them. She stood at the podium and said, "My abuser had wealth, power, and influence. But he didn't have the one thing that saved me: truth.
And the truth always comes out.
Sometimes, you just have to survive long enough to speak it." The room gave her a standing ovation.
Not because of the scandal.
Not because of the money, but because they saw a woman who had been crushed, silenced, and underestimated, and rose anyway.
And that's the story you've just witnessed. Not of a victim, but of a strategist. A survivor.
A woman who didn't just walk away.
She walked taller.
If this story of transformation and quiet power moved you, don't just scroll away.
Drop a comment below. What part of Camila's journey hit you hardest?
Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to remember.
Survival isn't weakness.
It's brilliance under pressure.
And next time,
we'll tell you the story of the woman who discovered her husband's secret family and flipped the betrayal into an empire no one saw coming.
Stay tuned.